May 8th, 1945. Admiral Dönitz orders all U-boats to surface and surrender. After 6 years of hunting Allied convoys across every ocean, 40,000 German submariners face a question nobody prepared them for. What happens now? Some boats never got the message. Others ignored it completely. The lucky crews made it to Allied ports. The unlucky ones didn't make it home for a decade. Some never made it home at all. If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the German Federal Archives and Allied interrogation records. Now back to the story. When Germany surrendered, 728 U-boats were still operational. 41,000 men served in the Kriegsmarine submarine force. Only 24,000 survived the war. But survival was just the beginning. Between May and December 1945, Allied forces processed tens of thousands of German naval prisoners across dozens of camps from Scotland to Siberia. Operation Deadlight started 3 months after surrender. The Royal Navy began sinking captured U-boats off the Irish coast. 116 submarines went to the bottom of the Atlantic. The crews watched from prison camps in England. Hans Gobler from U-505 later wrote about seeing his boat's periscope disappear under the waves, the submarine that kept him alive for 2 years. Scuttled like scrap metal. The Americans took their share differently. U-2505 crossed the Atlantic with a mixed crew. German submariners teaching American sailors how to operate their own boat. Lieutenant Commander Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock. The ace who sank 25 Allied ships found himself giving technical briefings to the U.S. Navy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the real story starts with the boats that never made it to surrender. Number 1, U-530, commanded by Kurt Lang, disappeared in the Denmark Strait on May 5, 1945. 3 days before surrender, 49 men aboard. The boat was heading for Norway when it vanished. British sonar detected a submarine contact that morning, followed by depth charge explosions. No survivors. No wreckage found until 1996. A Norwegian survey vessel located the hull at 430 meters depth. The conning tower was crushed. Inside, they found personal effects and the boat's Enigma machine, still in its housing. 49 men who almost made it home. Number 2, U-547 under Gerhard Böhme tried something different. Instead of surfacing, Böhme took his boat north toward Greenland. The plan was simple: wait out the occupation, then surface when things settled. They had supplies for 3 months. The boat stayed submerged for 67 days. On July 14th, 1945, U-547 surfaced off Cape Farewell and surrendered to the U-1S Coast Guard cutter Mojave. The crew was half-starved. 3 men had died from carbon dioxide poisoning. Böhme spent 2 years in Allied prison camps, but he kept 41 men alive by refusing to quit. Number 3, U-977, the most advanced submarine Germany ever built. Type 20-white, electric drive, could stay submerged for days. Commander Wilhelm Schultz got the surrender order on May 8th, but kept sailing east toward the Baltic. British intelligence tracked the boat for 2 weeks through radio intercepts. On May 22nd, 1945, U-977 surfaced in Kiel Harbor flying a black flag, the traditional symbol of no surrender. Shore batteries opened fire. The submarine dove and was never seen again. 47 men chose death over captivity, accused, tried, silenced. Number 4, U-234 under Hans-Jürgen Hellriegel attempted the longest escape run in U-boat history. Instead of surrendering in European waters, Hellriegel turned south toward Argentina. The boat carried enough fuel to reach Buenos Aires, where Nazi war criminals were already finding refuge. For 3 months, U-234 remained hidden in the South Atlantic. On August 9, 1945, the submarine surfaced off Mar del Plata and surrendered to Argentine authorities. The crew was interned but not imprisoned. Within 6 months, most of the men had disappeared into the Argentine countryside. Hellriegel himself vanished in 1947. Intelligence reports suggest he lived under an assumed name in Bariloche until 1973. Number 5, U-1234, an experimental boat testing the new Walter turbine system. Commander Ernst Cordes received the surrender order, but his engines were damaged from a depth charge attack 3 days earlier. The boat was taking on water and couldn't surface safely. For 18 hours, the crew worked to seal the hull while British destroyers searched the area above. On May 9th or 3rd, 1945, U-1234 blew its ballast tanks and surfaced directly between 2 Royal Navy ships. The crew abandoned ship as the submarine sank beneath them. 32 men were pulled from the water. 15 drowned in the engine room. Cordes was the last man off, clutching the boat's war diary and code books. The camps came next. Featherstone Park in England held 3,000 German naval officers. The Americans built Camp Concordia in Kansas specifically for U-boat crews. By September 1945, 12,000 submariners were scattered across Allied prison camps. The interrogations began immediately. Room 14 at the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center became known as the U-boat room. British intelligence officers spent months extracting technical information from captured submariners. Corvette and Captain Gunther Preen's first watch officer gave up the locations of 17 supply caches. Captain Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, Germany's top submarine ace with 44 ships sunk, provided detailed assessments of Allied convoy tactics. The intelligence was invaluable. It also kept the officers alive. The British were methodical. Each captured U-boat commander faced identical questions. How deep could your boat dive? What was your maximum underwater speed? Where did you refuel? The answers filled 12,000 pages of classified reports. Commander Peter Kremer of U-333 revealed the locations of secret supply depots in neutral Spain. His cooperation earned him better quarters and extra food rations. Survival meant information. Camp Clinton in Mississippi became the processing center for enlisted submarine crews. The men arrived in cattle cars, 60 prisoners per car, no ventilation. August heat in Mississippi killed 18 German submariners during the 3-day journey from New York. The camp commander, Colonel James Patterson, noted in his daily reports that the Germans were poorly adapted to southern climate conditions. Medical officers recommended immediate transfers to northern camps. The recommendations were ignored. At Camp Hearn in Texas, German U-boat crews worked cotton fields alongside prisoners of war from Rommel's Afrika Korps. The submarine veterans were easy to identify: pale skin from months underwater, distinctive blue-gray Kriegsmarine uniforms, and the peculiar submariner's walk developed from years of moving through narrow corridors. Local farmers paid the U.S. Army 50 cents per day per prisoner. The Germans received nothing. The interrogation techniques varied by nationality. American intelligence officers focused on technical specifications and tactical doctrine. British interrogators wanted to know about bases and supply lines. The French asked about collaboration with Vichy naval forces, but the Soviets wanted names: every German who had served, every family member, every contact in occupied territory. Senior Chief Petty Officer Heinrich Bleichrodt, veteran of 9 war patrols, spent 6 months in British custody before being transferred to Soviet control. His crime was commanding U-48 during the invasion of Norway. The Soviets considered this a war crime against a neutral nation. Bleichrodt was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in the Kolyma gold mines. He died in 1953, 8 years into his sentence. His family never received notification of his death. The medical experiments began in late 1945. Allied doctors wanted to understand how submarine crews survived months underwater with limited fresh air and no sunlight. At Camp Alva in Oklahoma, German submariners were subjected to atmospheric pressure tests designed to simulate deep diving conditions. The experiments killed 4 men and permanently damaged the lungs of 23 others. The research was classified for 35 years. Dr. Hubertus Strughold, former Luftwaffe aviation medicine specialist, expanded his research to include submarine crew physiology. Working with captured U-boat medical officers, Strughold conducted tests on sensory deprivation and psychological isolation. The subjects were German prisoners who volunteered for medical evaluation in exchange for better food. None were told the true nature of the experiments. Strughold later became known as the father of space medicine for his work with NASA. The escape attempts started early. On July 4th, 1945, 12 German submariners broke out of Camp McCain in Mississippi. They had spent 3 weeks digging a tunnel from their barracks to a drainage ditch beyond the fence line. The plan was to reach the Gulf Coast and steal a fishing boat. Local sheriff's departments captured 11 men within 48 hours. The 12th, machinist's mate, First Class Georg Schneider, made it to New Orleans. He lived under a false identity for 3 months before FBI agents arrested him at a German-owned restaurant in the French Quarter. The most elaborate escape plan came from Camp Papago Park in Arizona. 25 German naval officers spent 6 months digging a tunnel under the camp's main fence. Unlike other prison break attempts, this one was technically sophisticated. The tunnelers were submarine engineers who understood structural integrity and ventilation systems. Their tunnel ran 178 feet and included electric lighting powered by stolen camp generators. On December 23, 1944, all 25 men escaped through the tunnel. They scattered across the Arizona desert with plans to reach Mexico, then South America. The desert killed them faster than guards could recapture them. Dehydration claimed 14 escapees within the first week. 3 men died from exposure on Christmas Day. Only 8 prisoners were recaptured alive. The tunnel was filled with concrete and sealed. The repatriation process began in 1946, but it moved slowly. The Americans wanted to keep German submarine experts for their own naval research programs. The British used U-boat crews for mine-clearing operations in the North Sea. The French assigned German prisoners to rebuild destroyed ports along the Atlantic coast. The Soviets simply worked their captives to death. At Stalag 13D in Nuremberg, former U-boat commander Reinhard Surin found himself testifying at war crimes trials. As a prosecution witness, Surin detailed the German Navy's unrestricted submarine warfare policies. His testimony helped convict Grand Admiral Karl Donitz of crimes against peace. In exchange, Surin received early release and passage back to Germany. He returned home in March 1947 to find his family living in a refugee camp. The technical intelligence gathering continued for years. Operation Lusty focused specifically on German submarine technology. American naval engineers dismantled captured U-boats bolt by bolt, photographing every component and measuring every dimension. The type of Finniwenters submarine's hull design became the template for America's Tang-class submarines. The acoustic torpedo guidance systems pioneered by German engineers appeared on U.S. Navy weapons within 3 years. But the human intelligence was often more valuable than the technical specifications. Kapitänleutnant Adalbert Schnee, commander of U-201, provided detailed charts of Soviet naval bases in the Baltic Sea. His information proved crucial during early Cold War submarine operations. Schnee spent only 18 months in Allied custody before being recruited by U-201S, Naval Intelligence. He worked as a consultant until 1962. The psychological evaluations revealed disturbing patterns. Medical officers noted that submarine veterans showed higher rates of claustrophobia, anxiety disorders, and what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress. Dr. William Menninger, chief psychiatrist for the U-201S Army, studied 400 German submariners at Camp Sutton in North Carolina. His report, classified until 1978, concluded that prolonged submarine service caused irreversible psychological damage in 60% of subjects. The damage manifested in various ways. Former torpedo room operators suffered chronic nightmares about drowning. Engine room mechanics developed severe agoraphobia, fear of open spaces after years in cramped compartments. Radio operators lost the ability to concentrate in quiet environments. Their ears had adapted to constant engine noise and electrical humming. Silence became unbearable. Treatment was primitive by modern standards. The standard prescription was manual labor and outdoor exercise. At Camp Shelby in Mississippi, German submarine crews built roads and cleared forests. The physical work was considered therapeutic. Medical records show mixed results. Some men improved with activity and fresh air. Others never recovered from their underwater experiences. The reintegration process proved equally challenging. When German submarine veterans finally returned home, they found a country that no longer existed. The Third Reich was gone. Cities were ruins, families were scattered or dead. Many former U-boat bases had been converted to Allied naval facilities. Kiel, the heart of German submarine operations, was under British occupation. Former U-boat ace Erich Topp returned to Hamburg in 1947 to find his apartment building destroyed by Allied bombing. His wife and daughter had fled to relatives in Bavaria. Topp spent 6 months searching refugee camps and displaced person centers before locating his family. When they finally reunited, his 8-year-old daughter didn't recognize him. 3 years in prison camps had aged him beyond recognition. The economic challenges were severe. The new West German government offered no pensions or benefits to former military personnel. The Allies had banned all military organizations and veteran associations. Former U-boat commanders found work as laborers, factory workers, or farmhands. Their naval skills were worthless in a defeated nation with no navy. Some adapted better than others. Wolfgang Luth's younger brother Klaus became a merchant marine officer, transferring his submarine expertise to commercial shipping. Otto Kretschmer started a small engineering firm that designed pressure vessels for industrial applications. His knowledge of submarine hull construction proved valuable in civilian manufacturing. But many others never adjusted to life on land. The suicide rate among German submarine veterans was 3 times higher than the general population. Between 1945 and 1955, over 800 former U-boat personnel took their own lives. The official cause was usually listed as war trauma or adjustment difficulties. The real cause was more complex: guilt, depression, and the inability to forget what they had experienced underwater. The technical legacy lived longer than the men. By 1960, every major navy in the world was using German submarine innovations. The snorkel breathing system became standard equipment. The acoustic torpedo guidance technology evolved into modern smart weapons. The Type 21 hull design influenced submarine construction for decades. In 1955, West Germany was permitted to rebuild its navy. Many former U-boat officers returned to naval service, but in a very different context. The new German submarines were designed for coastal defense, not long-range warfare. The crews were trained by former enemies. British and American naval instructors who had once hunted German U-boats now taught their former adversaries. The circle was complete. Former U-boat ace Otto Kretschmer became commodore of the new German submarine flotilla. His deputy was Hans-Joachim Schwanke, a former Royal Navy officer who had sunk 2 German U-boats during the war. They worked together for 15 years, training a new generation of German submariners in NATO tactics and procedures. The personal reconciliations were often more difficult than the professional ones. In 1963, Kretschmer attended a reunion of Allied convoy veterans in Liverpool. He met Samuel Jones, a British merchant sailor whose ship had been torpedoed by U-99 in 1941. Jones had spent 18 hours in a lifeboat watching his crewmates die from hypothermia. The 2 men shook hands and exchanged war stories. It was the first time either had discussed the experience with someone who understood. The enlisted men had different experiences. At Camp Ruston in Louisiana, German submariners worked sugar plantations for 50 cents a day. The Louisiana heat was brutal for men accustomed to the North Atlantic cold. Dehydration killed more German prisoners in the American South than combat had in the final year of the war. Medical records from Camp Ruston show 137 deaths between June and October 1945. Most were listed as heat exhaustion. The Soviets took a different approach entirely. When the Red Army captured German naval bases at Königsberg and Danzig, they found thousands of U-boat personnel who hadn't made it to sea. These men disappeared into the Gulag system. Camp Vorkuta in the Arctic Circle became home to over 2,000 German submariners. They worked the coal mines 18 hours a day. The death rate was 70%. Those who survived weren't released until 1955. 10 years in Soviet labor camps for the crime of serving on submarines. But the strangest fate belonged to the crews of the Type von Wind U-boats, Germany's revolutionary electric submarines. The Americans wanted these boats intact. In Operation Paperclip, German submarine designers and their most experienced crews were quietly relocated to the United States. Helmuth Walter, designer of the hydrogen peroxide propulsion system, found himself working for the UAS Navy in 1946. His former submarine commanders became technical advisors for America's nuclear submarine program. The irony was perfect. German U-boat veterans helped design the submarines that would hunt Soviet boats during the Cold War. Kapitän zur See Hans Rudolf Rosing, who commanded Submarine Flotilla II, spent 3 years briefing American naval officers on anti-submarine warfare. The tactics that had terrorized Allied convoys were now being used to protect American shipping lanes. By 1950, most German submarine crews had been repatriated. But thousands never made it home. The casualty statistics tell the story. Of 41,000 U-boat personnel who served during the war, 28,000 died, 30% were killed in action, 20% died in prison camps, 10% simply disappeared. The remaining survivors scattered across the globe. Some found new lives in South America. Otto Schultz, former commander of U-849, became a successful businessman in Chile. Others stayed closer to home. Wolfgang Luth, Germany's second highest scoring U-boat ace, was shot by a German sentry in Flensburg on May 13, 1945, 5 days after the war ended. A case of mistaken identity that claimed one of the Kriegsmarine's most decorated officers. The technical knowledge survived even when the men didn't. Allied intelligence recovered 37,000 pages of U-boat technical manuals from captured bases. The designs for the Type von Wind submarine directly influenced America's nuclear submarine program. The snorkel system pioneered by German submarines became standard equipment for every navy in the world, but the human cost remained hidden for decades. In 1998, construction work in Hamburg uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of 214 German submariners. The bodies showed evidence of execution-style killings. These men had been captured by Soviet forces in April 1945 and murdered rather than processed as prisoners of war. The discovery revealed what many U-boat families had suspected for over 50 years. Not every submarine crew who surrendered lived to see prison camp. The last German U-boat didn't surrender until 1946. U-1061, a Type WA-30 coastal submarine, had been hiding in Norwegian fjords for 8 months. The crew survived on fish and abandoned Wehrmacht supplies. When they finally surfaced in February 1946, the war had been over for 9 months. Local Norwegian authorities had forgotten that German submarines might still be hiding in their waters. The boat was towed to Horten and scrapped. The crew was sent home without ever seeing a prison camp. Today, fewer than 200 U-boat veterans remain alive. They gather annually in Kiel to remember the 40,000 men who didn't come home. The memorial wall lists every name, every boat, every date, But the most telling statistic isn't on any wall. Of the 1,162 U-boats built by Germany, only 4 survive as museum ships. The men in their boats both became casualties of a war that ended 78 years ago. The final revelation came in 2019. German researchers examining Soviet archives discovered camp designation numbers for U-boat prisoners that had never been declassified. The numbers suggested that over 5,000 German submariners died in Soviet camps between 1945 and 1955, more than twice the previously accepted figure. Families who had waited decades for their fathers and sons to return home learned they had died digging coal in the Arctic tundra, thousands of miles from any ocean. 41,000 men went to sea in steel tubes. Half never surfaced again.